Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of source material, analyze it, and give you the essential knowledge shortcut. Today, we're deep diving into one of the most polarizing, successful, and financially complex institutions in global sports, Manchester United Football Club.
It really is a club defined by magnificent contradictions. You just can't understand Manchester United without understanding the layers of history, the phoenix rising from the ashes of tragedy, the, unparalleled sporting dominance under two visionary managers, and crucially, the controversial financial structure that underpins its modern identity as a multi-billion-dollar corporation.
That's absolutely our mission today. We're going beyond the scoreboards and the trophy cabinet to analyze the pivotal eras that forged this massive brand, dissect the complex ownership and debt, and explore the intense rivalries that still define the soul of the institution.
And we can start with a great example of history merging with branding. You hear the name the Red Devils everywhere, right? It sounds like a name born out of aggressive footballing history, maybe something fierce on the pitch.
Yeah, it sounds quite intimidating.
But our sources reveal a more local, slightly, quirky truth.
Okay, lay it on us. Where did the swagger actually come from?
The moniker, the Red Devils, wasn't generated internally. It was actually inspired by the local Salford Rugby Club, who were already using that nickname. Apparently, Sir Matt Busby liked it.
Oh, really? Busby?
Yeah, he thought it sounded intimidating and helped move away from the softer sort of Busby babes image, especially after the Munich tragedy. It was adopted informally for a while, but that iconic devil motif we all recognize today.
The one on the badge.
Exactly. It wasn't actually incorporated into the club crest until 1970, so it's a relatively modern piece of branding grafted onto nearly a century of prior history. Quite fascinating, really.
Okay, let's unpack the real beginning then. We have to go back way further than 1970, back to 1878, long before the Red Devil, to find the origin story. We're looking at a works team started by employees of the carriage and wagon department of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. They were initially called Newton Heath LYR Football Club. That LYR is key, standing for Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. This wasn't really a community club at the start, it was an industrial one.
Yeah, it speaks volumes about the club's working-class roots deep in the Industrial Revolution, doesn't it? These were railway laborers, basically looking for some organized leisure time. And those humble roots were certainly reflected in their first recorded match in 1880. They wore the railway company's original green and gold colors, apparently.
Green and gold, not red.
Not yet. Green and gold. And they suffered an absolute demolition, losing 6-0 to Bolton Wanderers reserve team. It's an incredibly inauspicious start for a club destined for such glory, you have to say.
What's fascinating about this early period, looking at the sources, is that the club's history seems less about immediate sporting success and much more about just financial survival.
Absolutely, that's a recurring theme. The first major crisis came quite early. In January 1902, they faced complete financial collapse. The club had racked up debts of £2,670.
Which sounds like a lot back then.
It was significant. Our sources say it's equivalent to around £370,000 today. They were actually served with a winding up order.
Wow. So that means what? Closure?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Legally being closed down, assets liquidated. They were literally days away from ceasing to exist altogether. It was that close.
That sounds like a true rock bottom moment. So how on earth were they saved?
Well, the rescue is a classic piece of football folklore. Apparently, the captain, Harry Stafford, managed to rally 4 local businessmen. One of them was John Henry Davies, who then became the club president.
Okay.
The deal was pretty simple. Each investor injected £500. It's a decent sum back then. This capital saved the club, but it really required a total rebranding to signal a fresh start,
And that rebranding happened officially on April 24th, 1902. They shed the Railway Association, the LYR, and became Manchester United FC.
It was an absolutely crucial move. The name change signaled the club represented the entire city of Manchester, not just a department of a railway company. And, with the new name came, pretty instant success under manager Ernest Magnol.
Magnol. He comes up a lot in this early period.
He does. He steered them to their first league title in 1908 and followed that up immediately with the first FA Cup victory in 1909. They even won the inaugural Charity Shield in 1908, a quick burst of success.
And Magnol's influence extended beyond just silverware, didn't it? The sources say he saw the need for a truly ambitious home ground.
He absolutely did. Magnol was a huge driver behind the monumental move in 1910 to their current ground, Old Trafford. He recognized that for the club to grow beyond its previous Bank Street origins, it needed world-class infrastructure, a stadium fit for ambition.
But then he left.
Yeah, controversially, Magnol left for rivals Manchester City in 1912, and the club's sporting instability returned almost immediately. The success sort of dried up.
That instability seems to define the next few decades, really, leading right up to the Second World War. The sources describe this period as the classic yo-yo club era.
That's exactly the term. And for anyone unfamiliar, a yo-yo club is one that constantly bounces between the top division and the second division. United were relegated in 1922 and then again in 1931.
Not exactly a period of glory then.
Far from it. But the absolute lowest point came in 1934 under manager Scott Duncan. They slumped to their all-time lowest league position, finishing 20th in the second division. They only narrowly avoided relegation to the regional third division north.
Wow, third division.
Yeah.
They were flirting with oblivion once more.
They really were. It shows that even after the initial 1902 rescue, that financial fragility just persisted.
So who stepped in this time? Another bailout.
Pretty much. The club was saved again in 1931 by a chap called James W. Gibson. He provided crucial investment of £2,000 and took control. Survival was often conditional, reliant on these single wealthy benefactors pouring money in just to keep the lights on.
It really shows that financial crisis isn't new to Manchester United. It's
Yeah.
almost baked into their institutional DNA from the very start.
Exactly. It's a pattern.
Before we transition to the post-war era, let's quickly just touch on the club's visual identity again, because it ties back directly to these historical shifts. We mentioned the original green and gold of the LYR.
Right, those railway colors.
Yeah.
They quickly gave way to the club's standardized look post-1902. The now iconic red shirts, white shorts, and black socks. That became the standard.
But the crest is probably the most significant visual cue, isn't it? It links them directly to the city's heritage.
It does. It wasn't just a randomly designed badge, not at all. The shield on the crest is derived directly from the Manchester City Council coat of arms.
Ah, okay.
And that prominent ship you see in full sail, that symbolizes Manchester's status as a major trading city, which was enabled by the Manchester Ship Canal connecting them to the sea. So it grounds the club geographically and commercially.
And then later, much later, came the devil.
Exactly. The incorporation of the Red Devil in 1970 formally solidifies that nickname we talked about earlier, creating the emblem we know today. So the badge itself merges civic history, industrial history, and eventually modern branding. It tells a story.
Right. When we moved into the post-war period, we really enter the era that truly established United as a global force. And that begins, absolutely has to begin, with the arrival of Sir Matt Busby in 1945. Busby's appointment seems to have fundamentally changed the relationship between the manager and the club itself.
Oh, completely. Busby was a true visionary who understood modern management before it was really formalized. When he was appointed, he demanded, and crucially, he received unprecedented control.
Control over what exactly?
Pretty much everything, not just team selection, but player transfers, youth development, even training methodologies. Before Busby, managers typically trained the team and maybe played the players they were given by the board. Busby created the blueprint for the all-powerful, holistic football manager we sometimes see today. He essentially told the board, look, if you want me to manage, I manage everything.
And that approach immediately bore fruit, didn't it?
Yeah.
Particularly with the youth system. This gave rise to the legendary Busby Babes.
Yes, the focus on youth was absolutely essential to his plan. Busby famously prioritized academy graduates. This led to an incredibly youthful squad, famously averaging just 22 years old, that stormed to successive league titles in 1956 and 1957.
Incredible achievement with such young players.
And what stands out to me from the sources is that they didn't just win. They played with this fantastic exuberance and attacking flair that really captured the public imagination. They were exciting to watch.
And that youthful energy propelled them onto the European stage, which was still a relatively new frontier for English clubs back then.
Exactly. They were genuine European pioneers. You have to remember, they were navigating the deep reluctance of the pretty conservative football league establishment at the time, who weren't keen on European competition.
Right. The league didn't want them to enter initially.
Precisely. But United pushed, and they were the first English team to compete in the newly formed European Cup in 1957. And they didn't just participate, they made a massive statement. They registered what still remains the club's biggest victory on record. A stunning 10-0 thrashing of the Belgian champions, Anderlecht.
Well,
Yeah, they were truly announcing English football's arrival on the continent. Big time.
but their European ambition, chasing that continental glory, often requiring rapid air travel back then, came at an incredibly high and truly tragic cost. Tell us about Munich, because that event really seems to define the club's very soul.
The Munich air disaster, February 1958, it's the defining, darkest moment in the club's entire history. The aircraft carrying the team home from a European Cup match in Belgrade crashed after refueling in snowy conditions in Munich.
Just horrific.
It was. The tragedy claimed 23 lives. That included 8 players, among them the universally acknowledged generational talent, Duncan Edwards. Gone, just like that. Matt Busby himself was so severely injured that he was read the last rites twice in hospital.
Unimaginable. The sources are clear that the club was completely shattered, losing the core of that phenomenal young team. How does a club even begin to recover from that level of devastation, particularly when its manager is fighting for his own life?
It was just an immense collective act of will, really, led by Busby himself once he started to recover. His decision to rebuild the team over the next decade is perhaps one of the most powerful examples of sporting resilience you could ever imagine. He focused on integrating the surviving players, like Bobby Charlton, with the next generation of youth talent coming through, and also making some key signings.
And that rebuild led to the creation of another famous United side, featuring the United Trinity.
Yes, the legendary trio. The absolutely dazzling, unforgettable winger George Best from Northern Ireland, the prolific Scottish goal machine Dennis Law, and the emotional anchor Bobby Charlton, the surviving hero of Munich. This team didn't just play football, they carried the emotional weight of the disaster and the memory of the babes.
And their story culminated 10 years later, in 1968, a decade after the tragedy.
It was just a historic, incredibly emotionally charged triumph. They became the first English club ever to win the European Cup, defeating Benfica 4-1 after extra time at Wembley Stadium.
A huge moment for English football, too.
Absolutely. But for United, that victory wasn't just a trophy. It felt like the phoenix rising from the ashes. It was the realization of the dreams of the Busby babes who never got the chance. It completed the Busby legacy in the most poignant way possible.
So if Busby built the foundation and the soul, what happened immediately after he stepped down in 1969? The sources suggest a pretty major collapse followed.
It was dramatic. The club suffered massive structural issues almost instantly. Busby had built the entire operation so much around his own personality and control. When he left, the center just couldn't hold.
No succession plan, really.
Seemingly not a robust one. The departure of the key United Trinity players around the same time compounded the issue, and incredibly, the club was relegated again in 1974.
Relegation just 6 years after winning the European Cup. That's staggering instability.
It really demonstrates that without that foundational leadership figure, the club lacked internal robustness. They did get promoted immediately under Tommy Docherty, who then led them to win the 1977 FA Cup. So, some brief success.
But even that didn't last.
No, even Docherty's tenure ended in high drama. He was sacked due to a scandal involving an affair with the wife of the club physiotherapist. It was just high drama and chronic underachievement throughout the late 70s and much of the early 80s, a real slump.
Yet amidst this chaos, there was one pivotal signing that the sources highlight, someone who would become a standard bearer for the future.
That was Ron Atkinson breaking the British transfer record to bring in Brian Robson from West Brom in 1981. Robson was an incredible talent, a real warrior, and a true leader. He went on to captain the team for an unprecedented 12 years.
12 years as captain. That's remarkable longevity.
It really is. He was the vital thread of quality and resilience during a pretty fallow period for the club, setting the stage in many ways for the next great era.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the second and perhaps even more dominant pillar of the club's history, the arrival of Alex Ferguson in November 1986.
Ferguson inherited a club that was desperately seeking stability again. They were actually in genuine danger of relegation when he took over, and success was certainly not immediate.
No, I remember the pressure he was under.
He faced intense media and fan pressure in the late 80s. It's widely accepted, almost folklore now, that his job was only saved by that vital 1990 FA Cup final victory over Crystal Palace after a replay.
That trophy was the watershed moment then.
Absolutely. It bought him the time, the crucial time, required hired to implement his vision, rebuild the squad, especially focusing on youth again, and ultimately build his dynasty.
And what a dynasty it became. The sheer numbers are just mind-boggling. 38 trophies in his tenure, including 13 Premier League titles. This was dominance on an unprecedented scale in modern English football.
It was absolutely revolutionary. With the dawn of the new Premier League era in 1992-93, United immediately took advantage. They won their first league title since 1967, ending that long wait.
A huge moment for the fans.
Massive. Then they secured the club's first ever double, winning the league and FA Cup in the 1993-94 season. And then incredibly, they achieved the double-double in 1995-96, becoming the first English club to accomplish that feat twice. They established this expectation of winning year after year that hadn't really been seen in English football since maybe the great Liverpool teams of the 70s and 80s.
If the 1968 European Cup victory defined the club's heart and soul, the 1999 treble arguably solidified its global reputation as a superpower. Tell us what made winning the Premier League, FA Cup, and UEFA Champions League in a single season so historically significant.
Well, it wasn't just the achievement itself, which is monumental. Only one English club has ever done it. It was the sheer manner in which it was achieved. The whole season felt like a tightrope walk, full of late goals and comebacks.
Especially that Champions League final.
Oh, the climax of the Champions League final against Bayern Munich in Barcelona. It remains perhaps the most dramatic few minutes in football history. They were trailing 1-0 as the clock ticked into stoppage time. 90 minutes up, seemingly destined for defeat.
And then came the magic of the substitutes, didn't it?
Precisely. Teddy Sheringham scores the equalizer in the 91st minute, stunning Bayern. Everyone thinks, okay, extra time. But then less than 2 minutes later, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer scores the winner, poking it into the net, famously sealing the 2-1 victory.
Incredible.
The sources emphasize that the sheer sudden drama of that comeback captured the imagination of football fans absolutely worldwide. It wasn't just winning, it was winning against impossible odds in the most dramatic fashion possible. That single night secured Ferguson his knighthood and truly solidified the club's status as a global superpower.
And that global status immediately paid dividends in terms of winning global trophies, not just European ones.
Absolutely. The treble team immediately backed up that achievement on the world stage. They won the Intercontinental Cup against Palmeiras of Brazil in Tokyo in November 1999. At the time, only one British team, Celtic, had ever won it. Later, under Ferguson, they added the FIFA Club World Cup in 2008, becoming the first British team to win that version too. These trophies showed they weren't just the best in Europe, but genuinely among the best globally.
And we should definitely mention the key figures who embodied this era, particularly someone like Ryan Giggs.
Giggs is the absolute epitome of the Ferguson era's longevity and sustained success. He's the most decorated player in English football history, period. It's incredibly fitting that he set the club appearance record, playing his 759th game during that triumphant 2008 Champions League final win against Chelsea.
Amazing career.
Just incredible. And Ferguson finally retired in May 2013, leaving as the most decorated manager in the history of football. An unparalleled legacy.
And once again, just like after Busby, the massive question arose. What happens now? What happens when the central architectural pillar leaves the building?
Well, the success under Busby, and especially that sustained, relentless success under Ferguson, transformed United from just a big football club into a truly titanic global financial brand. Our sources really detail that the foundation of the club's worldwide appeal was laid by the emotional story of Busby's post-Munich rebuild. That created the narrative.
Right, the romance.
Exactly. But the commercial explosion, that was turbocharged by the intensely media-focused, incredibly marketable stars of the late 90s and early 2000s.
And I guess no player defined that marketability more than David Beckham, right?
Beckham was absolutely integral, particularly as the sources note, to the Asian market success. It wasn't just his skill on the pitch, which was considerable. It was the convergence of football, celebrity culture, and fashion. He became one of the first truly global sports icons whose fame just transcended the sport itself.
A cultural phenomenon.
Totally. United effectively sold the game, the glamour, and the success simultaneously, leveraging his brand power to dominate lucrative markets in Asia and beyond. They were brilliant at it.
And that strategy resulted in just staggering commercial valuations.
Staggering is definitely the right word. By 2012, Forbes already ranked Manchester United as the world's most valuable sports team brand at $2.23 billion. That put them ahead of huge American franchises like the New York Yankees and Dallas Cowboys.
That's incredible for a football club.
It is. And the next year, in 2013, they became the first sports team in the entire world to be valued at an astonishing $3 billion. This incredible monetization ensured they held the title of highest-earning football club worldwide in the 2016-17 season, generating something like $676.3 million in revenue that year alone.
Wow. That kind of revenue is obviously driven by monumental sponsorship deals. Let's trace that evolution from the early days of shirt sponsorship.
Yeah, it started relatively early for English football back in 1982 with Sharp Electronics. That was quite revolutionary for its time. That long deal was followed by Vodafone, then the controversial AIG deal during the financial crisis, and then Aon.
But the scale really shifted dramatically with the big American corporations getting involved, didn't it?
It did. The Chevrolet deal, signed later, was a blockbuster, worth a reported $559 million over 7 years. Now, while that deal didn't always satisfy the financial analysts in terms of return on investment for Chevy, it certainly showed United's immense global negotiating power.
And their current kit deal seems to confirm that enduring financial dominance.
Exactly. The 10-year kit manufacturing deal with Adidas, which started in the 2015-16 season, was worth a minimum of $750 million, one of the largest such deals in football history at the time. And the current main shirt sponsor, the tech company Snapdragon, has a deal extended through 2029, reportedly worth upwards of $60 million annually. This commercial engine is just the envy of almost every other sports team worldwide.
But this is where the story pivots sharply, doesn't it? From athletic and commercial triumph to deep institutional controversy. The Glazer era, beginning with the takeover in 2005. This move fundamentally changed the club's entire financial profile.
It's arguably the single most important financial event in the club's modern history, and it is absolutely crucial we explain the mechanism clearly for you. Malcolm Glazer's 2005 takeover was valued at nearly $800 million. But, and this is the key point, he didn't primarily use his own money to buy the club outright. He used a financial strategy called a leveraged buyout, or LBO.
Okay, what exactly does a leveraged buyout mean in this context? How did it work?
It means that a significant portion of the money borrowed to purchase the asset, in this case Manchester United, was immediately put onto the club's own balance sheet as the club's debt. Our sources state over $500 million of borrowed money became the club's responsibility overnight.
Right. So it's like buying a house, getting a massive mortgage, and then somehow making the house itself responsible for paying back that mortgage.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. Manchester United, which was famously debt-free before 2005, was instantly saddled with over £500 million of debt, often carrying pretty high interest rates as well.
So the club, the asset being bought, was essentially forced to finance its own controversial acquisition. What has that leveraged control actually cost the club cumulatively over the years?
The cost is staggering, and it's really where the deepest source of sustained fan anger comes from. Our sources estimate that by 2019, the club had paid out over £1 billion, let that sink in, £1 billion in debt interest, bank fees, professional fees related to the debt, and also dividends taken out by the Glazer family and paid to the lenders.
£1 billion. That's money that could have gone into, well, anything else. Players? The stadium?
Precisely. It's money that has effectively left the football operation and gone simply into servicing the debt incurred by the takeover itself, or into the owner's pockets via dividends. It's seen as a constant drain on resources. While the club generally remains profitable due to its huge revenues, that profit isn't being fully reinvested back into the club in the way fans would expect or like. At the end of 2019, for instance, despite paying off huge sums in interest over the years, the club's net debt still hovered around the $400 million mark. The structural debt burden contrasts really sharply with the debt-free structure enjoyed by many of their major rivals, some of whom are backed by, nation-states or individual billionaires who inject equity, not debt.
This financial model, understandably, sparked massive and prolonged fan backlash, didn't it? The sources note the symbolic adoption of the original Newton Heath colors.
Yes, the resurgence of the green and gold scarf, the original colors of the Lancashire and Yorkshire railway workers, became deeply symbolic. It represents the fans' desire to reclaim the club, to return to its community roots prior to its corporatization under the LBO structure.
That's visual protest.
Absolutely. It's a powerful, tangible rejection of the ownership model, suggesting the current management are custodians exploiting an asset rather than true owners nurturing the club's identity and future.
And this whole saga leads us to the most recent significant change in the ownership landscape, the arrival of Sir Jim Ratcliffe in late 2023.
This development is complex, and it's crucial to understand the specifics. In December 2023, Sir Jim Ratcliffe's company, Ineos, purchased 25% of the club. However, the structure of the deal is the key thing here.
Yeah.
While the Glazers retain a substantial majority ownership, around 71%, the agreement grants Ineos Sport immediate, full control over all football operations.
So running the team, transfers, manager, academy, that side of things.
Exactly. Transfers, manager appointments, academy oversight, the sporting director role, all that falls under Ratcliffe's remit now.
So Ratcliffe gets to run the sporting side day to day, but the Glazers retain majority ownership and, presumably, the associated financial benefits and ultimate control.
That's the tension right there. They retain ultimate financial and institutional control, partly through different classes of shares that grant them disproportionate voting power compared to their economic stake. The club is now essentially run by this kind of partnership.
An unusual setup.
Highly unusual. The sporting decisions are driven by Ratcliffe's 25% stake, and his team, while the overall financial strategy and structural direction you'd assume remains largely controlled by the majority holders. It's a novel, split ownership model, and how it works in practice long-term is still unfolding.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to the physical home of Manchester United. Old Trafford, a stadium that has been just as central to their history as any player or manager. Moving from their earlier, more modest homes like Bank Street, the construction of Old Trafford back in 1910 was a massive statement of intent for the time.
It was pure ambition. Nicknamed the Theatre of Dreams, a name coined later by Bobby Charlton, actually it was initially planned by architect Archibald Leach to hold a phenomenal 100,000 spectators.
100,000 back then, wow.
Incredible, right? Though, budget realities meant it opened closer to 77,000 capacity. Still huge for 1910. And here's a fun piece of trivia from the sources. The record attendance ever recorded at Old Trafford, 76,962, wasn't even for a United game.
No. Who was playing?
It was for an FA Cup semi-final between Wolverhampton Wanderers and Grimsby Town way back in 1939. Just shows the scale of the venue even then.
The ground faced a real test of survival during World War II, didn't it?
Indeed. It suffered extensive bombing damage during the Manchester Blitz. The stadium was hit badly, forcing United to temporarily play their home matches at the ground of their local rivals, Manchester City's former home, Main Road, for several years after the war.
Imagine that today, playing at your rival's ground.
Unthinkable now, really. But it speaks to the post-war rebuilding efforts that Old Trafford was patched up and eventually fully restored. A huge undertaking.
And later changes reflected the shifting safety regulations in English football, particularly after Hillsborough.
Yeah, the most dramatic structural change came after the 1989 Hillsborough disaster and the subsequent Taylor Report. That mandated all top-flight stadiums in England become all-seater for safety reasons.
Which reduced capacity initially.
Dramatically, yes. Standing terraces were removed, and Old Trafford's capacity dropped significantly, down to about 44,000 in the early 90s, just as the Premier League era was starting. But then, the surge in success and revenue under Ferguson funded major rapid expansion, adding second tiers to several stands, filling in corners, bringing the current capacity up to 74,310. That secured its place again as one of the largest club grounds in Europe.
Now, with the new part ownership structure and Ratcliffe's focus on infrastructure, the future plans for the ground sound truly monumental.
They are absolutely massive. Since Ratcliffe's arrival, the focus has really swung towards either a major redevelopment of the existing Old Trafford or, perhaps more likely now, building a completely new, world-class stadium.
A new stadium. Where?
The leading plan, as of recent announcements, seems to be building a colossal 100,000 capacity stadium on land adjacent to the current Old Trafford site. A Wembley of the North is how it's sometimes framed.
100,000 seats.
Yeah.
What are the implications for the existing stadium, the Theatre of Dreams itself? Would it be demolished?
Well, the current thinking, which has been part of the planning proposals floated, is quite interesting. The idea is that the current Old Trafford could potentially be downsized and significantly refurbished to serve as a permanent, high-quality home for the successful women's team and the academy teams. Give them a proper historic base.
That's quite innovative.
It is. And crucially, the massive 100,000-seat new build is being positioned not just as a United home ground, but potentially as a national venue, capable of hosting major finals, England games, maybe even being considered as a host venue for huge global tournaments like the 2035 FIFA Women's World Cup, should the UK bid.
Okay, moving from infrastructure to conflict on the pitch. Manchester United's global status and history means they have several deep, historically cherished rivalries. Which ones really define them the most, according to the sources?
Well, first and foremost, you have to talk about the clash with Liverpool. This is the classic, probably the most famous fixture in all of English football. Its roots go way beyond just sport. They're embedded in the historic competition between the two cities during the Industrial Revolution. Manchester as the industrial textile powerhouse versus Liverpool as the major international port city.
And on the pitch.
On the pitch, they are simply the two most successful English clubs historically. Between them, they hold a combined 40 top-flight league titles and 9 European Cups Champions Leagues. It's a constant battle for historical and sporting supremacy. Bragging rights matter hugely.
Then we have the local battle, the Derby.
The Manchester Derby against Manchester City. This has intensified dramatically, as you can imagine, since the Abu Dhabi takeover of City and their subsequent rise to prominence, really from the 2010s onwards.
It used to be seen as less significant than the Liverpool game.
For many years, yes, but it shifted fundamentally from being just a noisy local rivalry, often with United dominant, to a constant direct fight for league titles. And most recently, incredibly, they've contested 2 consecutive FA Cup finals in 2023 and 2024. It's now a pure battle for current City dominance played at the highest level.
And finally, the rivalry that arguably defined an entire era of English football.
That has to be the rivalry with Arsenal during the late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
This was the definitive Premier League clash for almost a decade, fueled by the brilliant, often bitter, personal and professional enmity between Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsène Wenger.
2 towering managers.
Absolutely. Their teams were in direct head-to-head competition for the league title almost every single season between about 1998 and 2005. It was a rivalry based on intense strategic battles, psychological warfare, and often physical confrontations on the pitch. It's often described as the greatest rivalry of the Premier League era, specifically because of that sustained, high-quality, high-stakes conflict between 2 fantastic teams.
We must close this section, though, by addressing the elephant in the room. The clear instability and relative lack of success since Ferguson's departure in 2013. The sources consistently referred to the post-Ferguson decline. The managerial turnover alone is staggering.
It really speaks to the monumental vacuum Ferguson left behind. The subsequent decade, well, it's been pretty chaotic by United standards. David Moyes, Ferguson's hand-picked successor, was sacked after only 10 months.
A huge shock at the time.
It was. Then came Louis van Gaal. He managed to win the FA Cup in 2016, but was dismissed just 2 days later, a bizarre situation. Jose Mourinho came in, secured 3 trophies in his first season, including the UEFA Europa League, which was significant. But even he couldn't maintain stability or mount a sustained title challenge and was eventually sacked.
And the revolving door just kept spinning, didn't it?
Yes. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the club legend, had his tenure, which ended, followed by Erik ten Hag. He delivered the EFL Cup in his first season and then the FA Cup in his second, but even that wasn't enough to save him after a poor start to the 2024-25 season. He was sacked in October 2024.
And they've appointed again recently.
Yes, the club's very recent appointment of Ruben Amorim as head coach in November 2024 just shows that the search for that elusive stability and consistent Ferguson-level success remains ongoing in this post-dynasty era. It's proving incredibly difficult.
This period of turbulence also culminated in a major institutional crisis that really exposed the disconnect between the ownership and the fans. The European Super League proposal?
Ah, yes, April 2021. United was one of the key founding members, one of the driving forces behind the proposed breakaway European Super League. The public backlash was immediate, massive, and almost universally negative from fans worldwide, the media, pundits, even political figures.
It collapsed very quickly.
Incredibly quickly. United, along with most of the other English clubs involved, were forced to withdraw just 48 hours later amidst the firestorm.
And that fiasco resulted in a very public and actually historically significant fan protest, didn't it?
It certainly did. The subsequent fan protests against the Glazer ownership, already simmering for years, escalated significantly. It culminated in a pitch invasion at Old Trafford before a scheduled Premier League match against Liverpool.
They got onto the pitch.
Yes, hundreds of fans got onto the pitch. The protest was so extensive and, frankly, volatile that the Premier League was forced to postpone the fixture on safety grounds. It was the first ever Premier League match postponement caused entirely by supporter protest action. It perfectly crystallized that deep tension between the club's corporate ambitions under the Glazers and its traditional, passionate supporter base.
Yet, despite all the recent instability, the ownership controversy and the financial debates, the institutional record, the trophy cabinet remains phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely. That foundation of historical success is untouchable. They still hold a joint record 20 top-flight English League titles, 13 of those being Premier Leagues. They've won 13 FA Cups, which is second only to Arsenal. And they hold the distinction of being one of only 5 clubs globally to have won what's sometimes called the European treble, meaning they've won the European Cup Champions League, the Old Cup Winners' Cup, and the UEFA Cup Europa League at some point in their history.
And their most recent trophy wasn't that long ago either.
Exactly. Their very most recent piece of major silverware was that 2023-24 FA Cup, won under Ten Hag against Manchester City. It proves the capacity for success for winning big trophies is still there within the club, even if the consistency of the Ferguson era is currently missing. Hashtag, outro. So what really emerges from this deep dive, I think, is the constant, powerful tension that defines Manchester United. On one side, you have this incredible historical narrative of institutional excellence, driven by 2 absolute managerial titans, Busby and Ferguson, who delivered sustained, world-beating glory and built the club's soul. But on the other side, you have this recurring institutional financial fragility starting way back with the near bankruptcies of the early 20th century that kind of metastasized into the complex, self-inflicted corporate debt crisis initiated by the 2005 Glazer leveraged buyout. The Glazers, you have to say, successfully monetized decades of glory built by others, turning sporting triumph into staggering global revenue, but simultaneously saddling the club with massive, deeply controversial debt.
It's truly a remarkable story, isn't it? An ascent from a works team of railway workers who were literally days from liquidation to becoming the world's first $3 billion sports brand. They overcame unimaginable tragedy at Munich and somehow navigated decades of post-Busby instability to reach even greater heights under Ferguson. Yet, that figure, that £1 billion of cumulative interest and fees paid just to service debt since 2005 represents such a staggering opportunity cost, a cost ultimately paid, you could argue, by the club's infrastructure, its competitiveness, maybe even ticket prices for fans.
And that leads us perfectly to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. The club's future financial valuation, its sporting stability, maybe even its very identity, are now intrinsically linked to the proposed new, colossal 100,000-seat stadium project. Given the existing, let's call it $1 billion debt legacy accumulated under the previous ownership structure, coupled with the absolutely monumental cost of building a stadium of that magnitude in today's economy. Well, the question isn't really if they can afford it somehow. They probably can find the financing.
Okay.
The real question is, will this new stadium represent a powerful, decisive step toward future financial independence and much-needed infrastructural modernization, freeing the club? Or will it simply initiate a new, perhaps even larger phase of debt, further entrenching the kind of financial burden that has arguably plagued the club and constrained its potential throughout the entire post-Ferguson era?
It's the ultimate test, maybe, of whether this new part-ownership structure, this new direction, can finally put that debt legacy to rest. Or whether the enormous price of the next theater of dreams is simply passed on once again to the next generation. A huge question mark hanging over the club's future. That's all the time we have for this deep dive into Manchester United. We really hope you feel thoroughly well informed.